Hi, I'm Andrew Ward with Regen Farmers Mutual. Speaking with Rick and Andy earlier, and they suggested that I put into a presentation for the Traprock farmers a quick review of what's going on with carbon markets. So, first thing to understand is that the Emissions Reduction Fund, which has been for the last 12 years the major instrument in Australia for managing climate, is under review. Now, it's under review because there's probably been a lot of greenwash, to be honest. And the early days of the carbon market are kind of tainted with this ERF, and they're going to do something in the next few months with the ERF, either to reform what's gone wrong or maybe replace the ERF. Nobody really knows. The other thing that's happening within the carbon space is there's new methods rolling out. So some of these are coming from the regulator. The ERF in 2023 is scheduled to release this multiple project method, which would enable farmers to do a soil carbon and a tree planting or multiple ERF methods under a single project. And new technology is coming online, particularly around hyperspectral satellite technology, which is, claiming to be more accurate than soil testing and a heck of a lot cheaper. Where this new technology and new methods impacts you as a farmer is that it's likely to result in cheaper project development and cheaper measurement and verification over time. Probably a greater reliance on technology as well. The next point to bring up is that the corporate market is really heating up. So with the Labor government in power, they're ratcheting down on what's called the safeguard mechanism, and that's forcing the 250 odd biggest polluters in Australia, which you can imagine is your BHPs, your Rio Tintos, your big polluters, now actually having to buy in the market in order to reach their safeguard mechanism. So the government has put into law that by 2030, we'll have a 43% reduction in greenhouse gases, and they're now pricing that safeguard mechanism to hit that. And so this is an earlier target than net zero by 2050, but it's now in law, and it's forcing the corporate market to buy ACCUs. Essentially, the price, you would assume, will be on the rise, not just for ACCUs, but for other methods, Vera, Gold Standard, any internationally accepted method. The other thing is that in line with what we were just talking about, how the government is, writing into legislation our emissions targets for 2030, across the world there is even greater recognition of the expedient need to get to net zero by 2050. Now, what that means for you as a farmer is really interesting, because the rest of industries, as far as I can see, are just emitters. Like, they combust stuff, they transport stuff, they manufacture stuff, they use energy in their businesses. In agriculture, we do have emissions, related to fertilizer or diesel or, inputs into our business. But we also have the opportunity to create sinks, because we've got these wonderful photosynthetic tools called plants and soils and biodiversity. And we have the opportunity to manage those natural resources. So we've got more sinks than we've got emissions. So we have the ability as farmers, as landholders, to reach net zero. It's perfectly within our capacity. We could even produce surpluses. It's very hard to understand how the rest of the economy can create sinks within their own businesses, except through maybe avoided emissions, but not actually sequestering carbon. And so it stands to reason that, that we need to net ourselves out as farmers, and we're probably in the best position in the economy to do so relative to everybody else. And I guess that brings us to the next question, which is, well, what seems to be happening in the corporate market, like recently, as in the last fortnight to the last month, the supply chains and supply channels that you will sell your commodities into are collectively known as the FMCG, or the fast-moving consumer goods segment. And the FMCG is sort of where the mining industry was 2 years ago. They're starting to look now at their scope 3 emissions, is the technical term, but it means the emissions that come from their supply chains. And our big FMCG companies, our big commodity companies, the Archer Daniels, the Boods, the Cargiles, the Louis Dreyfuses of these world, they're all going to be massively looking for not just the commodity, but also the carbon that farmers can generate, surplus to their own needs, in order to make these supply chains of these fast-moving consumer goods compliant with the legislation that sees them get to 43% reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050. So, a question comes up for farmers, or I think is on the horizon for farmers, which is around, after you've netted yourself out, do you then net out your access to markets and your supply chain, and then at that price, once you've secured your own, those other areas of the economy that are emission heavy but have no sinks of their own, they're still forced buyers of agriculture, but in a limited market they're going to be paying more for that. Or as farmers, since right now there's a heating up of appetite amongst those polluters for carbon, and increasing motivations and incentives for farmers, do you sort of take the opportunity of entering into a new market, a new method, a new technology at a reduced cost, and get in sooner rather than later? These are the sorts of questions that farmers need to be asking themselves, and certainly at Regen Farmers Mutual we can help. All of these questions that need to be resolved for you within your context start with getting a carbon footprint and understanding what in your farm business are your emissions and what are your greenhouse gas emissions and CO2 equivalent, and what does that look like in terms of, well, what do you need to do in terms of land use or practice change or resource use to get yourself to net zero and your product out the door at net zero, and what does your supply chain need in order for our commodities as a net exporter of agricultural products out of Australia. We need our commodities as a strategic kind of thing to be tariff-free when they go and play in export markets. But if we're having to buy carbon in order to get into these markets tariff-free because we've already sold our carbon elsewhere, that could be strategically a silly thing for us as a country. Regardless, as a farmer, you're not wearing the weight of the world of the country on your shoulders. You just need to work out for yourself, how do you achieve carbon neutrality using your photosynthetic assets as sinks and understanding your emissions. And that all starts with a footprint. So please jump on over to the website, Regen Farmers Mutual. If you're in the Trap Rock, Kim Wilson will be giving you your carbon footprint calculator assessment, and that'll all happen in the next, say, month or so. But that'll be the start of your journey to understand carbon. I hope this video helps, and look forward to your feedback. Speak soon.